Well, yeah. So how was Paris, Luke?
Yeah, it's really good, man. Really good. Yeah, can't complain. Really good weekend. Good turnout. As with all European comps, there's a few things are like the equipment is probably not as good as you get in like OS3, Clash, etc. But yeah, it was fun, man. Fun weekend.
Good, good, man. It looked like there was some pretty ridiculous numbers put up over the weekend. I've been trying to catch up and watch everybody's video posts as much as I
Yeah,
can as they slowly trickle in, but um, not too far off the mark on who was going to podium in the under 105 Ks anyway. Um, it was
yeah. I
pretty
had, I
close.
had the top five bang on, just not quite in the right order.
Yeah, hell yeah, man. I wish I could have been there, but next time. But anyway, uh, Luke, John is my he's kind of the mastermind behind this podcast. I mean, it was his idea. Um, I don't know if John, you want to introduce yourself to Luke, and we can kind of go from there. I mean, I think everybody kind of knows who Luke Davies is, owner of Chaos Strength, in it's in Wales, correct?
It's in England, the gym is, but I'm from Wales. So.
Oh, you're from Wales. Okay, I thought your gym was actually in Wales as well.
Yeah. I'm just a big fan of strongman. I've helped compete or I've competed in a few just local shows and then helped volunteer at a lot of shows. I'm a big fan and everything. And Darren and I actually have never met in person either. We've only met through messages and happened to, I think it was maybe last month. Darren just happened to call me on accident through Instagram and I answered and we ended up having this long, like 30-minute phone call about just like training, work, and everything. And from there, I was like, that actually worked out pretty well having this video talk. And I was like, it would be nice to turn this into something more. So I figured these days I'm trying to just like jump in and do things because I think it's easy to sit back and worry about how things are going to go. And sometimes you
Yeah,
just have to go for it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
people just know me as that dickhead of Instagram, so always causing shit on my stories, and
Well, well,
being,
today's your lucky day. We get to cause more
yeah,
shit. So you and I've been talking, back and forth for a while now. I don't know how long it's been. More than a year for sure, maybe two or so.
yeah. It's been a couple of years,
Uh,
I think.
and bouncing, one of the big topics that we keep coming back to is these world records. And you're kind of the primary sort of historian now for strongman, especially weight class, as far as the keeping world records specifically. And you just started, or you just added it to your website at Chaos Strength, and including all the women's weight classes, the men's weight classes, along with videos. And yeah, I mean it's pretty much the only place I think that anybody can find the most up to date world records. And I mean the seems like you're really on top of it too. I mean there's guys on there that I would never have known if you weren't keeping those records. So yeah, I mean we're
Yeah,
gonna go ahead.
I started doing it because well, for about 3 year period, as you know, I was chasing the under 105 deadlift record. And when I first like set there as a goal for myself, I was like trying to find out information was nigh on impossible. Like finding out what the official record was, who had it, blah blah blah. So I obviously kept track of the deadlift record, but then about 18 months ago, I started like compiling a list of all the other ones. I just had it on my phone. I wasn't going to publish it. I just kept it for myself, really. And Rhiannon, because she likes to hold all the records. So she wanted to know, what was what. And then I thought, well, I was missing three or four, which I finally found. So then I just published it. Um, yeah. So that's why I started doing it, basically for
Yeah,
myself, because I wanted to
yeah,
break
but I
some.
mean it's become a great asset I think for everybody else. Because I mean when we did the Atlas Stone world record here, I mean we had to do quite a lot of searching and networking to find out what the actual world record was, because there was a few numbers that were getting bounced around. And some of them were not to 122 centimeter height, right? They were lower but heavier. So really kind of trying to dial that in and understand what the actual world records were not easy. So yeah, I mean, this is an amazing resource that you've put together, and yeah. But as far as world records go, I mean, it's like kind of an agenda that I like to push, or I'd like to see strongman advance on. Things that you and I've talked about a lot are the weighing, the actual implements because they're not standardized. Adding some standards. Maybe in the 24-hour weigh-ins or dimensions of implements, so on and so forth. And I know you've got a lot of opinions on that. So that's what we're here on World's Strongest Opinions to kind of share. I mean, why don't you give us some of your thoughts?
So as we know, the reason we all love strongman is like the randomness of it, the fact that every competition has different events. Like we're never doing the same thing more than once. But I do think with records, there needs to be some sort of, I think standardization is the wrong word, because I don't want to see the fact that we have to have exactly the same log or exactly the same dumbbell or exactly the same axle. But I do think we need to bring in like minimum standards that have to be met, if that makes sense. So, the log has to be within these certain dimensions, or has to be, same with the dumbbell, has to be within these certain dimensions. So that's the way I would like to see it going moving forward. I feel like at the moment it's just free for all of anybody can do whatever the fuck they want. Which in the general sport I'm all for, but not when it comes to records. And I feel like if you're not willing to put the effort in to meet these standards, then you shouldn't be having record breakers at your shows. Is the way I see it, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I can agree with that. Especially on the dimensions. This is not I mean, it's kind of a poor man's sport at this point, right?
Yeah.
And for for us to expect exact dimensions and people having to go out and purchase additional equipment, yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point. As long as it fits within some parameters, because I mean that we already have a large variety of equipment, and it certainly would make things significantly more challenging. I think we got into that, like you said, standardization where everything had to be precise. But yeah, I think I can definitely agree from that perspective.
And the one thing that annoys me the most with it probably is, as you've talked about before, where there's a lot of it's just us taking people's word for things. Like if the promoter says it weighs that, we're taking their word for it. And you and I both know that you've been to a show before and they tell you something weighs something, and when you lift it, it doesn't. Like we know what a 300-pound log feels like, for example. And I've been to shows where it's supposed to be 300 pounds, and then I've pressed it for like 4 reps, and I'm like, I can't do that. Do you know what I mean? So It's like it's a common thing in the sport where weights are mislabeled. Not always, not for necessarily nefarious purposes. Sometimes promoters just like they round up when it's easier to put the plates on, and stuff like that. So that's my biggest issue with a lot of these record breakers, is that there's no evidence of the implement being weighed. There's no evidence that the plates are correct, because, as you know, I've trained in commercial gyms. You can have 20-pound plates that might weigh 18 pounds or 22 pounds. Same with 45, they could be 49, 51, 42, they can be like that. You can't even trust the manufacturers, because, as you know, I promote shows over here now. So I bought 3 identical logs supposed to be identical logs from a manufacturer. They were supposed to be 100 pounds each. One weighs 97 pounds, one weighs 100 pounds, and one weighs 103. So if I had just gone off the manufacturer guidelines and just called it 100 pounds,
right,
which you'd think is a reasonable thing to do, but it's not. So yeah, I'd like to see everything weighed on camera. I'd like to see weigh-ins of the athletes weighed on camera as well.
Right.
I'd like to see the 24-hour weigh-in is probably the biggest one for me at the moment, though. being a lot more stricter from promoters' point of view, and just having the balls basically as a promoter to tell athletes no when they turn up early, because that's where I see. I promoted England's and Britain's strongest man under 80s last year, and the weigh-ins were supposed to start at 10 a.m. I had guys waiting outside the gym at 8:30.
Oh wow.
And I
They're
was
ready
like,
to go.
yeah, and I was like, tough shit, you waited 90 minutes. We're waiting
Sure.
at 10. But,
That's,
but I've been to shows myself where the promoters just like, yeah, whatever, just let's weigh in now.
yeah. Yeah, no, and I've experienced a bit of that too here in the US. But talking about, weighing the implements on camera, the thing that kind of occurred to me recently that's kind of crazy. Anytime we do an online qualifier, we have to weigh our plates. We have to
Yep.
prove what we're submitting weighs what it weighs. Now, I mean, I kind of understand we're individual athletes, and self-interested, and promoters are supposed to be sort of the authority over the competition, but it's kind of crazy to me that we have to weigh an online qualifier, which really doesn't mean a whole lot at the end of the day, but we can't. We're having, it seems like it's a difficulty to get world records weighed. It's sort of a double standard, right? I mean, if we got to do that for something that simplistic, certainly, it makes sense that we're doing that for world records.
Oh, 100%. Like, it makes no sense not to do it on video. Like, they get broken so rarely. And it takes 30 seconds to check something on a scale. And really funny, you can get them scales now that go up to like 300 kilos. You don't even have to take plates off. You can check the log, who
Yep.
log with the plates on straight onto the scales. We did it for Tom Hibbert attempted the under 105 log record at my gym about 6 weeks ago, and it took us 5 seconds to weigh it.
Yeah.
After
Exactly.
he attempted it. I do think that the athletes themselves need to take some responsibility. Tom, for example, was great with this. He brought his own camera crew. So even though I was filming everything, he filmed his way in himself with a camera crew. He had a camera guy filming all his attempts, filming us weighing the log before and after. So he didn't just rely on me to do it. He
Right.
took some responsibility himself to do it. Obviously, that's not always possible. If you're at big shows, you can't take a posse with you. But for the most part, I think it needs to be athletes stepping up as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, I'm kind of a firm believer that the ball's sort of in the athlete's court now, especially with so many federations and organizations popping up. We're kind of the only ones that are going to hold them all accountable to ensure that there is any kind of minimum standard. But also, I mean, I'm kind of a believer too. If you're going to start, I mean, as much live streaming that's starting to happen in the sport, there's no reason that somebody with a mobile camera can't be putting that on the implement being weighed too, so that it's being live streamed for everybody to see as well. I think in the very least, somebody should be weighing it and posting that video. But with the live streaming going on nowadays, there's no reason, in my opinion, that can't be live streamed for all to see.
Yeah, I agree. If there's a live stream, there's no reason not to do it live. Like I said, if it isn't a live stream, then you should be at the minimum weighing the implement. I would like to see it either immediately before or immediately after the lift, so we know
Sure.
it's happened there and then, as opposed to it's a video that was taken 10 minutes ago and then they changed the weights or whatever. What we did with Tom is, as soon as he put the log down, we put on scales, so there was no gap
Right.
in between. And it takes, like I said, it takes 5 to 10 seconds. It's not something that's going to take up 10 minutes of the competition and slow everything down. There's no real excuse not to do it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I know you've mentioned before too, maybe you can just kind of give us some more thoughts on you believe that world records should really be set in competition rather than kind of the one-off record breakers. You want to kind of give us some thoughts
Yeah.
on your perspective there?
So I probably sound like a bit of a hypocrite because I have broken the world record in a one-off deadlift competition. But yeah, records when they first became a thing always just happened in a show. So you'd have a show and it had a max log, and you'd have a show and it had a max deadlift. And I don't know if it's the same in the US, but in the UK now we've had a couple of like guys come and break records and they're not actually strong men. So I know like there's guys who've broken deadlift records and they've never done a full strongman show. They've just, I like deadlifting in straps and a suit. And they've come over and broken a strongman record when they're not really a strongman.
I mean, technically, we could do that in powerlifting though too, right? We can. Powerlifting allows. I mean, they've got like the push pull or bench only, deadlift only segments to come. At least here in the U.S., they do.
Yeah.
No,
I get that.
It's not something I'm go and do that too.
It's not something I'm massively bothered about because I do enjoy the push pull shows as well. I prefer it when it's in like an important competition. Do you know what I mean?
It's definitely more impressive.
Like the under 80 kilo Atlas Store world record. We just did. It was the 6th event in Britain's Strongest Man under 80s, and the guy who broke it had to get it to get on the podium. And when you have to break the world record to get on that podium, I think it got him a qualifying spot for OS3, got him some prize money. I don't know, it just means a bit more, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree 100%. But on, from my opinion too, like on the other side is after days possibly of competition, Clash 2021 is a good example. At the very end of day 3, there was an attempt for a world record Atlas stone, but the guys were so fatigued that I think there was a 500 Atlas stone there. I'm not sure if anybody even broke it out the ground. I think the heaviest stone that day was lifted was 425, something like that.
Yeah, sounds
so. So I mean, totally agree. Way more impressive when you set a world record in competition, but at the same time, sometimes it maybe does make more sense to have those standalone record breakers because it's not not always possible to have the still have the energy and freshness to be able to hit those big world records, especially towards the end of shows. And I know, weightlifting, is only kind of 2 lifts. Powerlifting's only 3 lifts. I think it definitely makes sense in those. But still, I mean, powerlifting has the record breakers too, or the ability to do deadlift only or bench only.
I think. The only thing I was going to input is I think sometimes it helps having athletes come from other sports. Just for the deadlifts, it's interesting to see athletes come from other sports who don't do the crazy hitching and stuff and pull up and press numbers. Like, it's interesting. I think it's always good sometimes seeing like strongmen try out the powerlifting to like practice that deadlift without doing like wild hitches and stuff. I think that can be always interesting to see because I think it is like we do want the strongest people in the sport. So it's kind of a mixed bag of like you want to see the biggest lifts up there. But I think definitely in competition makes a big difference.
Yeah, maybe I'm just being a gatekeeper and or like get out of our sport. You don't belong.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of good to see some of that crossover. I mean, John and I have been talking. Actually, our last episode hasn't been posted yet. We talked kind of at length of, how CrossFit is getting the weight class athletes are almost as strong as the weight class athletes in strongman. Plus, doing events for longer time, more events, more implements in their medleys. I mean, it's getting crazy. So. It's very interesting to me to see that kind of a crossover and see, some comparison between athletes in different sports. The strongman, right? We've always kind of been on this thing of we're the strongest, but are we really, right? How do we know that if we don't start seeing some competition between other athletes from other sports?
I think what I'd like to see going forward is with the record breakers is I'm not a fan of when it's just one person going for a record. I like it. I would like to see some more head-to-heads or 3 people going for them because it's what they did at the Arnold UK. They had a record breakers on the Sunday, and the guy said, the organizer was like, I'm not just doing one person going for records. So that's why Kira came over for the under 64s, Kira Rickson, so she could go head to head free, and then she went head to head with Kate on the log. So you did it with, I think it was 4 of you going for the Atlas Stone.
Yep. Yeah, I wanted more, but I'll pick up when you finish there.
So with the record breakers, because I do get why we need to have record breakers, because as a promoter, putting a max event in a full show is a pain in the ass. It takes ages. You can't really do more than one per show if you don't want your show running on for 5-6 hours. So I do actually get the need for the record breakers, even if I prefer seeing them in full competition. But I would like going forward to see more than one person going for it when they happen.
Yeah, and I tend to agree. When we did the feats of strength here, I wanted to have, ideally the strongest guys, like the top 10. I think actually I capped it at 8 because I didn't want the stone to be absolutely gooey with tacky by the end. But I definitely wanted to have a good field. But I think you kind of see this in all the record breaker events, is that not a lot of people are willing to pay the money to travel for one event, right? Or things happen. I mean, we had one guy that got sick, one guy had a family member that passed away, one got hurt. I mean, just various things happen, and it's kind of tough to. Ideally, I agree with you. Anytime we do a record breaker, the strongest people should be there. The previous world record holder should be there, ideally. But that's a tough logistical scenario sometimes, I think. And you just end up with what you end up with.
Yeah, especially with a lot of the best guys on individual lists being in different countries. So, like for the deadlift, for example, we'd have to get guys from the UK, America, Eastern Europe, Tyson in Australia, like all the 4 or 5 best deadlifters at 105 in the world are all from different continents.
Right. Yeah.
Well, the current record holders from South Africa. So like all those guys in our show would be hard. From that point of view.
Agreed. But that kind of goes back to why we also, say that the implements, unless it's a deadlift and done with calibrated plates, really everything needs to be weighed and verified. Because it is almost an impossible scenario to have all of the best guys in one place competing, where everybody knows exactly what they're lifting, that their world record's going to be beaten by the right weight, right? This is verified. I mean, that's a big argument for why is it the sport needs to kind of move forward, advance forward in that regard.
Yeah, exactly, man. When we're all lifting on different continents and different kit, like we just can't. I know we've said this a few times now. Take people's word for things. It doesn't even matter like how high level the show is. It doesn't matter if it's world strongest man, or because I've been to very, very high level shows where I'm like confident the weight was wrong on implements. I don't know whether there's a pressure from promoters that they want to see records broken at their shows. I'm not sure what it is that's stopping this push towards higher standards, because it does seem to be, to me at least, a lot of people pushing back on the idea that we should have higher standards and that we should be looking to make the sport more professional. Because I hear the argument quite often in the UK, at least, that it's strongman, the weights are supposed to change, it's supposed to be different, things change on the day, it doesn't matter what the weight is, blah blah blah. I'm not sure if it's the same over there with you.
More or less.
Yeah, which at a local level I kind of get, but when we're talking guys who are basically training like professionals, put in a lot of time, effort, money into their training, killing themselves basically, then their sacrifice needs to be rewarded properly by having the platform for them to show their hard work off and not have any shred of doubt. Because that's if you worked your ass off to break a world record, and there's like just one thing that might be slightly off, and you have people on Instagram or Facebook saying, "Oh well, how do we know that this is this?" That's not fair to that lifter.
Right.
I think because a lot of times, even I don't think that there's necessarily even anything malicious about it, but just
Yeah, I agree.
like you said, like using a manufacturer's thing of I bought a log off Amazon that it was 92 pounds. I kept lifting with it and I was like, either I've gotten weaker or this doesn't weigh 92 pounds. And finally I got a scale out and weighed it. It was 108 pounds. 16 pounds is a huge difference when I was like everything I did, I felt terrible. And I'm going through the workout and I was like, I can't get anywhere near the numbers that I'm supposed to be doing for my training. Because this was a 12-inch log. I was like, you think it's a standardized thing. It's metal. It's nothing custom. And then that 16 pounds difference of like, even Darren and I were talking about, you have, I mean, he was saying weighing 100-pound plates that can weigh anywhere from 108, 109, 111 pounds. Like you actually could be taking away records from people. But I also think on the flip side, there is an issue where it happens here in the US of like people really want records to be broken. So not only is it about the weights, but sometimes you even see almost there's an element of somewhat lax judging standards because you don't want to be the judge who took away a lift from someone. You don't want to be the promoter who weighs in the implement afterwards and accidentally have it be 3 pounds less than what it was if like there's a margin of error. So I think, yeah, there's a push there.
Yeah, you don't want to be that guy. Nobody wants to be the dickhead who takes away someone's record. But if you're a promoter, sometimes you have to be a bad guy. And it's how people need to have the balls, basically, to say no.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But I mean, that kind of, it's tough to not have those conversations without talking about standards and standardization, though, because there is like, I mean, strongman really by and large has really zero standards. There's no standard for judging. There's no minimum experience level for a judge. Typically, I mean, world records get judged by higher level athletes, I think, which is fair. But one, I mean, I've been judged by a lot of different higher level athletes, and the variation in their style or what they let slide is pretty dramatic at times. I mean, some of them are very strict and some of them are very loose. And yeah, when it comes to world records, having a loose standard, I mean, it in the very least, it causes a lot of behind the scenes questioning. I don't know if anything gets really negative, but I can imagine that somebody that held the record previously, I mean, it could possibly cause some animosity too. Like,
so I actually have an anecdote on this because I held the Welsh Opens deadlift record. Okay, at like 925 pounds, I think it was, and then Gav Bilton broke it at Giants Live Deadlift World Championships, and he pulled like 935. And in my opinion, it was right. And there was, I would say, it was that show where like 6 guys pulled 1,000. Do you remember that one?
Right. Yeah.
6 or 7 guys. And in my opinion, half the 1,000-pound pulls weren't fucking locked out.
Right.
And yeah, I could be pissed off about that because it was my record that was broken. And not really because Gavin is way stronger than me. And it was only a matter of time before he beat my deadlift anyway.
Right.
So I wasn't that bothered. And he beat it this year like by another 10 pounds and it was a way better rep. So it didn't really matter. But yeah, I can 100% see, especially if it was a world record, not just a national one, people being like really, really pissed off. because it's all well and good. Someone could say, "Oh, you can come back and break it again," but it's not that freaking easy.
Yeah, no kid. I mean,
They world records for a reason. Like, not many people break them.
agreed. Yeah, and I think it's fair too. I mean, you kind of alluded to it as, you know, it's not that these people aren't strong enough to accomplish what they're accomplishing or going after. It's just a matter of having some standards and ensuring that a world record is as legitimate of a lift as they come. Right? It's not.
Well,
You know, in a competition when you're doing something for reps, doesn't matter if it's a deadlift or a log press or whatever. A lot of times, like the down commands come faster, right? Because you're on a short period of time, which is, you know, is okay, I think, to some extent. When it's coming to a single rep lift, you know, I think there's got to be some standards on lockout, stability, control.
What would your solution be? For that in maintaining like a certain level of standards? Because would you say we had a standardized list of things that needed to happen, and then a show happened and a good lift got given that didn't meet those standards? Say it was blatantly obvious on the video, say that it wasn't locked out. Do we then say to that lifter post comp, okay, that's not good enough, it doesn't count? Like,
man, I mean, that's a tough question to answer because you know, it's always been the call is good. If the judge gives you a down command, it's a good call, right? Who are, you know, do we have the power to go back and tell an athlete like
this is
the
what
mob doesn't agree?
Yeah, exactly. And this is what I've been going over in my head, because I've been thinking, oh, it's all well and good creating this, you know, like list of standards and judging standards, but then what happens if someone doesn't meet that?
I think
you know,
yeah.
Go ahead, John. I know you got something to say.
Oh yeah, no. I think we talked about it earlier. Is like the IPF has a new rule where you have to reach bench depth of your elbow has to go below like the top of your shoulder or something, and they're not going to overrule any of the past records, but they're going to just say going forward, here are the standards, because I think there is an issue with that. There's two issues I see with a lot of world records. With overhead, sometimes people are so eager to give a down command. All you need is like half a second of seeming stability and you get the down. And then with deadlifts, I saw the Giants live one where everyone's breaking 1,000 pounds. So part of the issue with hitching and why it's not allowed in powerlifting is because it's hard to tell what's a good lift because you need those knees locked. Whereas in strongman, there's become this thing, especially in the suits, like, and I know how it is, especially in like the metal jack and stuff. Like the suit does kind of stop you at the top.
Yeah, it does.
It's this thing where like you just keep hitching, and eventually you stop. Your knees are still at a slight angle, but as long as your back's straight, like you have a neutral spine, if you can hold that for 3 seconds, almost any comp I've seen, you get a down command, even if your knees still aren't 180 degrees. They're probably 178, which is still close.
For the record, I have been guilty of that myself, so I'm not going to give people too much.
But we can say in the future, maybe let's try to avoid that.
Well, I think we've all been guilty of a lot of these things. But I mean, being guilty and admitting to it and saying, you know, I want better for myself and the sport is okay too, right? Because it's a lot of experience talking, right? And I think, you know, it's easy. We could definitely write up a charter of standards. It's getting everybody else to agree to them that would be the challenge, right? I mean, the solution is just really as a sport, as a community, the athletes need to kind of agree and start pushing for the standard, the bar, so to speak, to raise.
I think it starts, like you said, with the athletes, because it's also, I have a friend who's been going for 1,000-pound equipped bench and everything. And it's that idea of like, if you're only around people who aren't really pushing you, like lockout can be really hard with that kind of weight. And you'll have guys who like in their training, they never quite get that full, their elbows are never quite fully locked. In training, that's one thing. But then in comp, getting a red light right off the bat with bench really throws off your pattern. And you see some of these athletes, especially going towards that 501 kilo deadlift, trying to break that barrier, is it's also impacting your training if you're constantly posting these videos where you're never locking out anything above 400 kilos, which is okay. Like, that's still impressive weight, but it starts there of like these little gradual steps of like, if you're kind of taking it easy, it's the same as like you see some powerlifters who always train in straps and can do crazy thing in straps, but then when it comes to just regular grip, they're 100 pounds lagging. And ideally, you want your training to be optimal. So it starts that way of like, in your training videos, make sure you're actually locking it out, because if you can lock out a weight in training and close there, it's going to be easier. But if in training every single time you're dropping the log as soon as you feel like it's somewhat stable, you're dropping the bar as soon as like your back's neutral and your legs are like 178 degrees, like it starts to become a habit that kind of goes up to the top level. Like, it's interesting seeing guys go from like amateurs, where that's fine, on a local level, to state, regional, and then national. It kind of goes from there.
I definitely agree. You should train like you're going to compete, right?
Yeah. And I think that's why the competitions need to set the standards so it kind of flows down.
Sure.
But
I
it's
think
come from the athletes too.
Luke's question though was, what is the solution? Do we have a solution? Because I mean, you said it before. We want to be solution oriented on this podcast, and it's not an easy solution, right? I don't know if I have all the answers.
It goes
It'd
back
be
to
nice if we had that overarching kind of umbrella organization over strongman that set the standards for the sport, but we don't. And what we find is every time someone becomes displeased or disenchanted with one organization, another one pops up.
yeah.
And so we could say, and I'm just spitballing here, you don't put the record on the historical list if it doesn't meet standards. But will someone else be like, well, screw you, I'm going to go start my own list?
Yeah, exactly. Because there's been a couple of records recently where people have had opinions on whether they should have stood, and in the UK as well as in the US. And I've been asked, "Oh, are you going to put it on your website?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I have to, really, because if the organizer of that competition is, it's not the athlete's fault. Basically, the athletes have done what they were told to do. They followed the instructions. They've been given a good lift. I don't feel like I have the power right now. Maybe one day I'll be like ruler of strongman, but right now I don't feel like I've got the right, really, to say to someone, okay, your record doesn't count. Even though there's are things that should be non-negotiables, in my opinion. 24-hour weigh-in being a big one.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, say, if we find out that someone had a 30-hour weigh-in, then it should be null and void straight away. However, you and I both know that if I did that, there'd be a massive shitstorm.
Right.
And I'm not sure. I think the way forward is to have like a published list of standards and try our best to get people to follow them.
Yep.
Whether people actually do or not is another thing. But at the moment, there's nothing. There's not even like a hypothetical list of standards anywhere at the moment. So I feel like actually having something in writing on a website somewhere needs to be the first step.
Yeah, I agree. I'm all for that. And I would definitely love to help with that. But I think too, in addition, just it's continuing the conversation too, and getting more people to buy in, and continue pushing that agenda. And hopefully, like you said, eventually people will just start doing it and agree, because I think there's a lot of logical reasons for these, and we can keep trying, and in the end, either the strongman community as a whole is going to start, pushing for that, or they're going to stick to there's too many standards already, and we want it to be completely unstandardized.
Yeah.
Because I see those conversations too. Those conversations pop up once in a while too. Like, is strongman too standardized?
So obviously I've been having the conversation with you on Instagram about the records and stuff. So I've been like reaching out to other people to have similar conversations, especially with guys in the UK, and half of them just being like, I don't care. And they're like, why do you care about having these standards? And I was like, blows my mind. They're like,
Right.
they're just like, oh, I just go to the shows and lift. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah. And I mean, there's definitely those guys here too. There's, records don't matter, just go compete. and I mean, maybe there is something about that, right? I mean, maybe we care too much. maybe in the end of the day, it doesn't matter, and strongman's just going to be a hobby sport from now until hell freezes over, right? And
yeah, I definitely care too much, so I can attest to that.
I
I don't
think
think any of us can, but again, I think with your passion, my passion, and I know there's others that agree, right? Because I've actually had sort of the opposite experience here when I reach out to other athletes in the U.S., especially some of the higher level athletes. There's a lot of buy-in actually. I think a lot of people, and maybe it's just a coincidence because I surround myself with like-minded people. Maybe I need to start reaching out to people that aren't like-minded and see how they feel. But, for the most part, people tend to agree. So I think there's a desire for the sport to advance from that perspective, at least on the world record stage. And you mentioned earlier too, just going to competition and having things change, and implements weighing, one lane having a different weight than the other. I know guys, there's a little bit of animosity sometimes after competitions when they find out that one lane was significantly harder than the other. It's kind of problematic because those guys put in the time and the effort, blood, sweat, and tears to go and have their hopes dashed because their lane was they got in the hard lane.
Yeah,
So,
I've done. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Glenn Ross's Ultimate Strongman. He has these yokes. They're like made with like railway sleepers.
okay.
So they're like these big wooden frames, and they weigh 1,000 pounds empty. Okay, and they're horrible. I've had in a show once, and my spine hurt for weeks afterwards. But there's like a rumor going around the UK scene that like one is as light as 950, and then another is as heavy as 1050.
Oh, wow.
And he has four of them, and it makes sense, right? Because they're wooden,
right?
they're like used outside and they get wet and stuff. So you have four of those lined up, and you basically it's pot luck whether you get the light one,
right? Yeah,
and you're never going to find out the difference. But yeah, it happens a lot, even at high level shows.
sure. You're right. Wood dries and swells and moves and does everything else constantly. So yeah, it would not be a surprise that those have a lot of variation to them.
All I know, it was heavy as fuck.
those things
I
are
hate yoke. Yoke always hurts me.
Yeah,
My least favorite of it. I don't even train yoke anymore because I'm like I'm not going to do any better if I train it every day or every week, and then I can't do anything else because I'm so destroyed. Yeah. I don't do any better if I train it than I don't, so I just don't train it anymore.
I'm like that with most of the events nowadays.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm getting older. I'm finding that I can't max out like maybe once a month now. So one event and then I'm done.
Well, I think it is hard though. I mean, it's kind of the theme of this thing of like these things kind of trickle up. Of like the heavier the weights get, it's nearly impossible to weigh some of these things and stuff. So I think it is like it's a challenge, and I guess like as far as the solution goes, is like these small little things of like Darren and I were just debating about whether or not to release episode 3 because originally we had mixed feelings about it. But then thinking about it and talking to people, it's like we're in a age where algorithms and apps reward quantity over quality. If you can put out quality that also has quantity, that's like the winning formula. And some of these things of like, and you see MMA, bare knuckle boxing, all these things, like they have hype around their weigh-ins, they have hype around all these things of like getting everything ready, watching people prep. So you can do these things like as a promoter to actually help promote your event of like these things of like showing people weigh in. That's a fun video you can put out, like all these things to kind of like get it out there. Because I think for too long, there's been so many events where like you don't actually get to see anything. And we're all just looking at the same Excel spreadsheets from Reddit, trying to compare scores that are hours late. And some people have cell phone video that looks different than what they saw in comp. Like, so I think to help the sport grow overall, like more exposure means more money, but more accuracy, like more videos means more accuracy overall and stuff. Like you see all these things of like watching World's Strongest Man allow more and more of like the guys there to like film their YouTube videos there because it helps build hype around the whole event. So I think these small things that can like actually help the sport, but also help promote the athletes of like getting these things out there. But it's hard to get everyone on board because I think there is that attitude of like, I was just looking at another strongman show to register at, and in big bold letters at the end of the registration form, it said, "This is strongman. If you complain, we will refund your money and we'll cancel your registration." And I was like, "Oh,
okay." They will refund your money?
Yeah.
That's very unstrongman.
I know.
Every time you register
no refunds.
There's always a disclaimer, no refunds.
Yeah. Apparently it was if you complained online beforehand. They're like, we'll just get rid of you. So
yeah, I agree with what you're saying though, John. There's no reason why promoters couldn't spin it as a positive. Like say, have footage of the weigh-ins. Having a constant video of say the record attempt and then the weigh-in of the implement would just, I would think it would lend the video an air of legitimacy as well, because if you just put up a video that says, "Oh, new world record," and it's just the lift, people who say someone doesn't know this person, say it was a random European guy who none of us had ever heard of, and he'd just broken the log record in the 105 class. And he just put up this video and said, "New world record." Most people would just glance on by. Whereas if it was like an official video with weigh-ins, everything else on it, I feel like it would, if anything, it would get more attention. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing that's time consuming. It can be something that can enhance the actual lifts as well.
And I think that standardization does help. I mean, you see one guy just blown up completely on the internet of like Jamal Browner pulling 500 kilos with straps.
Yeah.
It was sumo, but it's still raw. Like, I mean, aside from the straps, but like, it's interesting because you watch his videos. The success is the fact that he only ever lifts on calibrated plates, and it's a deadlift bar. So it's pretty much like everyone, like no matter what sport or discipline you're looking at it from, you can always see a Jamal Browner video, and you're like, for one, that's an absurd amount of red plates on the bar, but like you know what it is, and it's interesting because it makes it super relatable of these ideas of, because it's interesting how many of my friends or people outside lifting, they don't always know what all these things weigh and everything, but some of them have been at gyms where they can at least know like, oh, a red plate is 25 kilos or 55 pounds. Like it gives it a sense of scale. Whereas like some of these ones, you look at like Ronnie Coleman's old videos with like 400-pound plates on each side. For many people, that's kind of an abstract thing. You see the bar bending, but there is this like, how much weight is that? It's just a lot. So I think it's not a bad thing. I think it just takes a little bit more time. And sometimes people feel like they're kind of rushed for time, so they skip these things that could actually benefit.
Yeah, but my point of view is that if you haven't got the time, don't fucking host a world record attempt.
Don't fucking do it. Agree. 100%.
Like nobody's making you host world record. If you haven't got the inclination or the time to do it properly, don't do it.
Yeah. And we talked about it. You may have seen in our first episode, I think it's important to acknowledge for a lot of promoters, they're doing it on their own time. They're volunteering a lot of their own time. They don't have a lot of money, but
Yeah.
we're talking about high level competition, right? World records. Yeah, I agree 100%. If you can't meet some minimum standards, you probably shouldn't be putting a world record holder or record breaker on, period. But kind of, getting to some of the other comments that you were making, John and Lucas, I think there's a lot of value to one of the biggest, and we've talked about this before. I'm kind of going to start sounding like a broken record eventually, but one of the biggest problems in the strongman sport is the lack of money, and we have a lack of money because there's a lack of audience, and because of a lack of audience, there's not a lot of sponsors, right? Because there's not a return on their investment when nobody's watching. And I'm a firm believer that adding some standards so that it's more comprehensive to the viewer is going to encourage more people to watch. I think it's a big detractor for audiences to watch when, like you said, I mean, this is some guy putting up a weight that says world record means absolutely nothing to really anybody. and there's no way to know from one record to the next what is being accomplished if it's not verified, and we're not communicating with the audience and showing that things are done in a manner which is just standardized and organized and professional.
It is a lot to ask, though. I think sometimes or some people feel like it's a big ask to like have these things of like having things tightly run and tightly organized. But you see, like, there is a passion for like people want to see these events and want to see these sports and stuff. But it is like, I mean, it's hard when like everything has become so abstracted that like many events you don't have a rep counter, you don't have a scoreboard, you don't actually, nothing's weighed. So it's like all these unknowns that get more and more where it's like, oh, well, like this event is put on for the audience of us. We all kind of generally know what's happening. We're interested, but it's like, how do you get your spouses and your families and every other people actually involved? Because oftentimes you do see that where it ends up, especially on some of the local shows, feeling like you're doing community improv, where it's just like your friends and close family like coming to watch you perform for a show that you paid $100 for. Like, it's this idea of you want people to be able to like find it accessible, and like we are in an age where you do need unlimited content out there. So I think people only benefit from like more transparency and just more footage and stuff out there. I think after a while, it is that idea of, like you said, especially at a national level, I think sometimes it's this idea of you take it to the point where you expect people to have such a sense of gratitude that the show is being put on for them that they can't say anything about it. It's like, we're doing this for you, but it's arguably you want it to be a sustainable business model and to attract more viewers. And there definitely is like that interest out there. Like we've talked about it before, of like how many of every strongman now has a YouTube channel. Rogue streams everything on YouTube, then they cut it down the next day, which is super impressive to be able to have that condensed, like watch an 8-hour event get cut down to 42 minutes, which also gives you a sense of how much time's happening in between everything. But I don't think you necessarily have to like shorten things that crazy much. But I think trying to expand the audience beyond just people who know about it and everything, I think it would be helpful, because like you said, it is such an abstract concept that after a while, like if you're only appealing to people who are already inside the group, it's hard to grow a sport from that. But there is clearly an audience out there. I mean, you see the Stoltmans, their YouTube channel's great. Like so many of these people want to see what's out there and everything. And it helps make it much more accessible to like see these things go from being an abstract concept to like an actual tangible idea of like, oh, now that this is weighed out, you know exactly what this is. instead of just like, oh, here's what we're doing. I don't know. It makes the sport real for people.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
But
Definitely.
it is hard because I think in the end, it's a vicious circle. If there's not enough people watching it, so then you want to be slightly lax on your judging in your events, so you get more records, so more people will watch. But it's like it kind of goes back and forth then, because I think, and it is hard, like you said, of like how do you get the clout or the level where you can say this wasn't a world record, or this wasn't an attempt, and I don't know when that'll happen, but I think starting to have these standards in the future will help the athletes, because I think athletes know when there's an asterisk by their record. Like, unless they have no self-awareness, like most athletes kind of know when you got something of like, I've done competitions and meets before where I'm like, probably shouldn't have been given to me, but like it was, but you know the asterisk is there.
You can't.
Yeah, it makes you feel much better when there's no asterisk next to like your lift, when you can say this was a good lift by all standards.
I agree with that. We can't ask him to give it back, though. I mean, I've been in a situation like that where I didn't feel good about a win. Wasn't that it had nothing to do with my performance. Really had more to do with someone, my competitor's performance. But like, there's been times where I'm like, I don't really want that win, but I was given it, and like, yeah, you're right. Like I said, it bothers me personally, but I don't think that I would ever go to the organization or the promoter and be like, take this away from me.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Because I mean, it is clout, and like you said, the spirit of strongman is like, we glorify the strongest man, and that's where real clout comes from. I mean, I'm just a piss on, right? I'm a peon. My accomplishments don't amount to enough to have any clout, right? The guys that have really accomplished things are the ones that have the most clout in the sport. And that kind of just goes hand in hand with that glorification of strength, I think, which is, is good from that perspective, that's what the sport's about. But what we really need to do is get buy-in from those guys that are at the top, the guys that are holding the world records, to really push that message, because that clout will definitely be very beneficial in getting the rest of the community and the sport on board.
Yeah, and I think there is a desire for it. I mean, you see, like equipped powerlifting was huge back in like the 90s, but has steadily tapered off. And it's interesting that like more and more eyes are on these super well-regulated federations. I think because it is like, it makes a bit more sense. Whereas especially like as someone who's competed in unlimited ply powerlifting, people have no idea what you're doing because they don't understand what your suit is. So it is like this idea of people want to know what's going on. And I think even if you just have a handful of federations saying like, these are the clear things, like you need a 24-hour weigh-in, people can show up at 6 a.m. if they want to because they drove from somewhere, but that doesn't mean you get to weigh in at 6 a.m. when everyone's weighing in at 10 a.m. And I think these little small things of like making rules will work, because there are like, I looked up a list of powerlifting federations in the US and it's like hundreds of them, but people only know the top 5 and everything. They get kind of less and less rules the farther you go. So I think there is some desire for that and everything. It's just trying to tap into that, and getting people to buy in is the hardest part.
That's why I feel like we can't really say anything yet about stuff we deem not meeting standards, because there isn't anything written down. Like there's no, as far as I'm aware, they might be on the Strongman Corp website, but I don't think there's nothing written anywhere that says it has to be a 24-hour weigh-in and not a minute more. Like we all know that. Like it's an unwritten rule. Everybody knows it shouldn't be more than 24 hours, but it's not actually written down anywhere.
Right.
So
yeah, none of these things are written down anywhere.
that's the problem.
I don't think 24-hour weigh-in is written down anywhere. I don't think even I call it reverse scoring. When you reverse the placements, right? That's not written anywhere, but that's kind of like something that's always existed in the sport, or should, in my opinion. All those little things. None of that stuff's written anywhere. There's no standard for a promoter to put on a show. I mean, specifically in the U.S., even sanctioned competitions, there's really no minimum standard they have to meet. There's no minimum real rules other than, the scoring is dependent on the number of competitors. I don't even know if they have to follow that rule, to be honest with you.
No, I've seen shows at a local level have seemed to have made up their own scoring system.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think that's a fair place for to start, Luke. I mean, I think that's a good idea, good point. Let's start with writing some minimum standards down. I mean, you can publish it on your website if that's something you want to do. I mean, I support that 100%. And, we just continue having these conversations and hopefully get some buy-in from the top guys. Cause I think, that those guys are going to be the ones that are going to really be able to push the message and get buy-in by the greater community.
I have actually started writing like standards just for the big lifts at the moment, the ones I track on the website, because I have been tracking stuff like, I know they technically exist, but I don't really understand moving event records. They don't make any sense to me.
Yeah, me either.
Because like they seem to be based on max weight, but whenever I've ever seen a max weight moving event, it's always about time. So it's like so I've just tracked the big lifts. So axle, overhead, dumbbell, log, so the big overheads, and deadlifts and stone. They're like the big five for me.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, we did the max farmers here, which we didn't consider time, but when you really think about those moving events, that there is a ton of variation there now.
Yeah. So
I mean, handles on farmers could be anywhere from 10 inches off the ground to 18, right? Makes a big difference.
Did you see the pic that they had at the Ultimate Strongman in Paris?
It looked low.
It was so low. It was like a deficit.
Yeah, that looked ridiculous.
But yeah, that's why I haven't done it with stuff like that, because there's so many variations that, like, do you go off time? Do you go off weight? What distance do you do? Do you have separate records for 5 meters, 10 meters, 50 meters, 20 meters? Like, yeah. And mostly because trying to find all those and track all those is near impossible.
And that's where, it can kind of get that way in a lot of different events. I mean, we talked about it previously, John and I, about a fixed axle versus a non-fixed axle, a 20-inch stone versus a 22-inch stone. Where do you draw the line and say this is what you have, what the parameters are? Because I mean, there's a big difference between loading a 400-pound stone at 20 inches versus 22, right?
Yeah,
big difference. But at the same time, we can say that every one of them should be done on a 21-inch stone, but at some point the weight has got to dictate a larger stone.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the difficulty with strongman.
So I came across that actually so I started off with the stones, and I said, I'm just going to read it out to you now. So I based the minimum diameter off the standard size for the lightest record. So currently the under 64 Atlas Stone World Record, which Ree has, is like 310 pounds.
Okay.
And 310 pounds is typically a 19-inch. So what I've said is that it's got to be a minimum 19-inch stone until the weight reaches a point where the stone would be a bigger size. So when the lightest record goes up to, say, what's a 20-inch stone normally? 350?
350, 330.
Yeah,
150 kilos so roughly, I think.
Once the record goes above 330, I feel like the minimum size should have to change to 20-inch.
That's fair.
And the same with the Atlas Stone. Realistically, most 500-pound stones will be 22-inch stone. So really, you should have to do a 22-inch stone to go heavier than that. So, but again, the lightest weight class Stoke record is currently the 80s, which is like 385 pounds, and that's a 21-inch. Right. So I feel like until the under 80s goes above, say, 440, then the minimum size should be 21-inch, and so on and so forth, if that makes sense.
That's fair.
I think these things are good. Also, I looked it up, and strongmanstandards.com is available for $12 a year. So there knows I can throw up a website that can last for a year for like less.
Nobody has purchased that up to date.
says a lot about our sport.
Yeah. So I think, I was surprised that the .com was available for something like that, because they're like, these are two common words. Like, it should be pretty popular. It's still $12. So I might have to make.
Hey guys, I don't want to kill us here, but we're about 10 minutes past an hour. I don't know if we want to push too much longer. I don't know that anybody's listening for an hour and a half. I know
I feel like this is a good point to end anyway. The fact that we should have something written down, create some standards, try and push that forward, and get as many people on board as possible.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Any final words, John?
No. Luke, where can people find you or find this list of everything? That would be great to just have that.
If you go, my website is, I'm just going to tell you the exact link now. So if you go to chaosstrength.co.uk, that's got like all my gym and everything on. But one of the menus across the top is the world records section. It's a drop-down menu. It's got all the records for the 5 lifts I mentioned just now for every class. So under 64 women, under 73 women, under 82 women, open women, under 80s men, under 90s men, under 105s men, and opens men. I've also got British records on there, and I'm actually working on American records as well. I'm just missing 2 or 3 of the American ones. As soon as I have those, I'll be putting the American ones on there as well. Nice. Yeah, I'm up to fair. I still have these from last week just because I've been in France stuff, so I haven't had time. There's also at the bottom, there's a video link to the record as well, which I felt was important. So there's actual video evidence of everyone.
Yeah, this is wonderful to look at.
Beautiful.
Good. Yeah, we'll definitely share that, because I think this is great being able to look at that. Because like you said, I think more eyes on the sport is better. Like that's our main goal, is trying to offer solutions. We do have strong opinions about things, but I mean, it's because we care. And like you said, I think some of us might care a bit too much, but I think it's better to care too much than to not care enough.
Agreed.
Indeed. Well, hey, Luke, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm sure we'll be talking more. I look forward to seeing the standards and reach out to me if there's anything I can do to help.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm always willing to talk for an hour about this stupid sport. So yeah, pleasure.